I was invited here to talk a little bit about what's happening in South Florida, specifically around alligator Alcatraz. Um, I want to begin with saying that our Florida program within AFSC has been focused on advocating for immigrant and undocumented rights for the last couple of years. And the alligator Alcatraz is one of the many struggles and fights that we have to shut down these detention facilities that harm our communities. And this is just one facility of the many in South Florida that are causing harm to the community that I serve. And I'll just preface by saying, this didn't just start overnight. I know a lot of people have heard about alligator Alcatraz. Many people have read many articles, and unfortunately, Florida has been all over the media, and not for the good things, because Florida is one of the most anti-immigrant states in the United States. But I'll start with saying that alligator Alcatraz, though it was built in 8 days, the infrastructure for it started happening around 2018. And I say this because that's the time where our governor Ron DeSantis was elected, and his campaign was specifically focused on creating an anti-immigrant sentiment in the state. And as we move forward into 2020, we see the election of Biden. And, during that presidential election, Republicans and really made immigration a wedge issue in our community. And we begin to see a lot of immigration policy and implementation being created because it had been taken up as such an important topic during those elections. Then in 2022, during the midterm elections, Republicans win, and they send a strong message to Florida, again using immigrants and undocumented communities to further build their platform. And then we see in 2023 when Ron DeSantis declares a state of emergency and starts to redirect a lot of funding, especially after we had seen such an increase of Haitian immigrants fleeing to the US, and starts to really go heavy on bringing federal funds to continue to militarize our coast, our border, and continue to build on deporting and deterring immigrants from calling Florida their home. And then in 2024, throughout to 2025 of this year, we start to see an increase of 287G agreements, which is basically, for folks who may not know, it is this relationship, a strengthening of the relationship between ICE and police police officers in the state of Florida. And then we start to see an increase of federal funding going into detention facilities, and especially like the one in Everglades. Alligator Alcatraz, the whole vision was definitely to create an infrastructure that would detain and deport immigrants and undocumented individuals in such a speedy manner. It was built in 8 days, and it was built in the middle of the swamplands of Florida. And the justification of the build was, again, the need to attack and deport immigrants in the state of Florida. And then I want to also emphasize that this location was specifically chosen because it was in the middle of nowhere, and it also created a platform for zero accountability, where people, decision makers and policyholders, didn't really have to give explanation of what was happening. The intention behind creating Alligator Alcatraz was definitely one to, again, remove individuals in a speedy manner, but also to keep it under the radar. And then we started to see an increase of funding going into it. And what we started seeing was that federal funding, specifically FEMA funding, was being cut. And for folks who know, the state of Florida is constantly being threatened by natural disasters such as storms and hurricanes. So you can imagine the devastation of knowing that FEMA funds would be redirected. And it's not just a couple of $1,000s. We were talking about $450 million a year of taxpayers that was going to be used to continue to create this and run this alligator Alcatraz. Again, people have seen the pictures, and it has been blasted all over media how horrible the conditions in alligator Alcatraz have been. Again, it's in the middle of a swamp. We are constantly under heat waves, and so that was another condition that people were having to navigate. An increase of bugs, mosquitoes that were also creating very hostile living conditions for individuals. There was a over flooding that was constantly coming into the facility. And again, I just want to say that this was not a building. This was something that was created overnight, and these were basically cages that people were living in. And it's important for people to know what's happening in these detention facilities, not just because the money that's being invested into it, but because these detention facilities are being created to specifically strip the humanity of community. We know that the most affected in these of the most impacted and the most affected community members are always going to be people of color, people who are poor, and people who do not have access to a lot of the resources in our community to help them get out of these detention facilities. I think another thing that's important to mention here is that this detention facility, though during the middle of the year, we had a victory to shut down the facility. The governor appealed his case to continue to run and operate the facility and continue to open up the facility and continue to detain and deport individuals from alligator Alcatraz. And also, this was all happening when our government had its shutdown, one of the longest shutdowns that we had in the US. And knowing that there were so many families that were being affected, that were losing their SNAP benefits, that were losing their health cares, we saw that these detention facilities were still being run when we knew that the money that was being invested in these facilities could very well go to community who needed it the most. And so I also just want to redirect, myself into another point of conversation, and I know that this is still happening, like our people are still being detained, are still being deported. I think right now, some of the scripture that you all are really reflecting and reading is very important, because we are living in a world where there are so many monsters, and there's so many monsters being created and made, and we are easily thinking that the monsters are these large corporations, that benefit from these detention facilities, that benefit from people being detained, from people being arrested, and from people being deported. But, outside of these corporations, there are other monsters, and those monsters are the people who choose to stay silent, who choose not to get up and fight for others, and choose not to fight for their own rights. And something that really struck me as I was reading your lectures, your scriptures that you all are reflecting on, is that you all need to challenge yourself. It's not just about being born in the midst of monsters living around us or during a time of monsters, but how do you wake up and stay true to your values and faith? Because our current political environment is going to make a monster out of anybody, and can very well make a monster out of you. And again, I said a monster can be created out of these current conditions. And how are you not becoming a monster? How are you choosing to live into your values, into your faith? Um, and how do you continue to raise your voice and allow others to raise their voice too? How do you continue to look for justice and seek justice and fight for justice without becoming a monster yourself? Um, and we currently have the perfect conditions to create a monster. And I continue to repeat that because we are all responsible for everyone. We, regardless of our beliefs and our political backgrounds or our religions, we are the ones that are responsible for our communities. We hold each other. And if one person is not free, that means that we are all not free. And so we very well hold the responsibility to continue to support and uplift our community members. And it's very important for people to understand that right now there are so many people who are not free. And there are so many people like you all here who are choosing to be here on a Sunday and educate yourself and really rethink and reimagine what a life would look like when everybody is free. And so that in itself is very commendable. It's very uplifting to know that there are people who are willing to challenge what is currently happening to our community and to our society. And yeah, I know Adams is going to talk about free families a little bit later on in the agenda, but this campaign, this body of work is happening and is being created through the resistance that people are having amidst all of the challenges that they're facing, through the tension, through family separation, through no access to food, through no access to housing. People are still choosing to believe that there is a better world, and still choosing to come together in community and stand together and uplift each other and support one another, because we are stepping away from the traditional organizing of just having numbers. We're choosing to build community. We're choosing to integrate our beliefs, our cultural backgrounds, our music, our songs, our stories, because right now we're in such a horrible and scary moment where people who were unafraid at one point are now afraid, and we're being pushed back into shadows. We're being pushed back into the darkness. And we're being forced to be invisible again. And it is so sad to know that there are so many people right now afraid to fight for their rights right now. And so how do we again go back to keeping ourselves accountable and responsible for our community, and how some people are putting their bodies on the line and some people are actually out there talking, um, and and connecting with the community and telling them that regardless of what's happening, you're still human. And how do we bring that humanity back into our organizing, into our teachings? And so that's what Free Families is really about. It's amidst all of the horror that is happening in our community, we are choosing to continue to step up and be part of real changes in our community by being together. Because right now, policy and our political environment are wanting us to be divided, are going to continue to want us to be working in silos. And so this is such a pivotal moment for us, to continue to build community, to continue to resist, and come together. Because if one person is not free, that means that we are not all free. And so we are fighting for freedom, not just for ourselves, but for everybody else. And I know I'm probably at time. So I appreciate, again, just being here and be able to share a little bit of what we're up against in South Florida. And again, that's one detention facility out of the many detention facilities that are in South Florida, that are in the South, that we're hoping to shut down, because we were able to shut down one detention facility here in South Florida, and we know that we can continue to do that not just here, but all across the country. Thank you.